Hello and welcome to Lesson 2 bonus, where I'm going to be talking about what you should be thinking about when doing your writing assignment. So a lot of times children will sit down to actually write their assignment. They will have a complete blank. They will not know what to write or how to start. And that's what I want to teach you, what you should be thinking and what you should be doing when doing your writing assignment. So follow along with me in this lesson 2 bonus. Let's move on to page 2 of this handout. Things you need to think about when doing your writing assignment. I start off with questions you might be asking yourself if you don't know what to write. So the first question you might ask is, what am I going to write about? That's such a common question, and the answer would be, I don't know what to write about. How do I even begin to think about what to write? So this explains what you might be saying if you don't know what to write when you're thinking about this question. Another question you might have is, what should I be writing about? What exactly does the teacher want me to write about? I don't understand what they want me to write about. How do I even begin? So the answer would be, look at the specific instructions in the lesson and write down or highlight the main points of what you need to do. Then write down at the bottom of your lesson assignment possible story ideas. So you're going to look closely at the instructions of what you're supposed to write, and then write some ideas from those points at the bottom of your lesson assignment page to give you some possible story ideas. The next question you might be asking is, what do I need to include from the writing assignment instructions? You know what you're supposed to write about, and now you're thinking, what do I need to include? So these are the things you're going to need to include in your story. You need characters, and you plan that on your weekly writing assignment. And when you're doing this, you're just going to think of names, and you can think of any name you want. You should have at least 2 characters. So think of 2 people's names. It could be people that you know or people that you don't know, names that you like or names that come to your mind. It doesn't matter. Just pick any names. Then you want to do the setting, plan where this story is going to take place. What country, what city, what type of atmosphere is it? Is it in the desert, at the beach? Is it in the morning, afternoon, or evening? Is it in the day or night? Is it in the spring, winter, summer, or fall? Is it in the 1800s or the 1900s or current day? These are all the things that you can be thinking about for setting. Then plot. You're also going to put that part on your weekly writing assignment. Plot is what exactly is going to happen in this story. Now, a lot of times when I'm writing my stories, I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I just know that there's going to be a beginning, middle, and end, and I'm going to include some type of problem. So I might have to come back to that when doing the planning, because it might just come spontaneously as I'm writing. Or if you want to plan it, then you'll just put down what happens at the beginning. Let's say they go to the beach. What happens in the middle? They get sunburn and hot, which is a problem. And then the last thing is they decide to go home early. So that would just be a basic plot outline. Then you want to think about your point of view. Do you want to use third person or first person? That's what point of view is. Are you going to be talking with the word I in it, or are you going to be talking about characters and you're not going to be in the story? So third person is, I'm going to write about someone else who knows more than the characters. First person is, I'm going to be a character in the story who doesn't know much about what's going on around him or her. So that's what you have to choose for point of view, third person or first person. Most people go with third person, talking about someone else, but you can use first person if you want and make yourself one of the characters. The next thing you want to think about is the theme. You want your message to bring hope and emphasize character and how individuals can overcome their problems using wisdom from the Bible. So try to think about what these people can do to solve their problem, and try to emphasize a Christian character quality that they emulated or some kind of truth from the Bible that they might have used. Next is style. You're either going to use dialogue or description. Dialogue is where the characters talk about each other, and description is where you tell what your character is thinking and doing. You don't put it in quotation marks. They're not thinking out loud. They're just doing what you tell them to do. But with the dialogue, you're putting actual conversations or quotations of what these people are saying to each other or out loud. And if you're using dialogue, I will teach that to you in lesson 4. Next, think about your introduction. How are you going to introduce the setting, the characters, and a little bit about the plot? And then the body is where you use most of your sentences to tell the main parts of the story. What happened, what they did, what the problem was. And this is where you describe how it starts, how the problem is created, and what the problem is. That's the body part. And the conclusion is where you talk about how they solve the problem. I will make sure the problem in my story is solved and how it makes everyone feel or think. So if you're following this line of thinking, you go from I don't know what to write to looking at the specific instructions and writing down what you should be writing, and then thinking about who your characters are, what your setting is, what the story is, what point of view you want to take, what your message is, style that you want to take, and what your introduction is going to be, your body, and your conclusion. So then you ask, okay, if I know all of this, then how do I actually begin? So let me explain that there are 3 main steps in the writing process or writing routine. You can spread them out throughout the week or do it all in one sitting. Be prepared to work on it for a couple hours at least if you're doing it in one sitting. So the 3 main steps of the writing process are the planning, that's the first step, the writing of the first draft, that's your second step, and the editing and revising of the writing is your last step. So let's talk about the first step. On the lesson assignment page, brainstorm a few story ideas, decide what is the main problem and characters in your story, what your point of view is, and what is your theme. On the weekly writing assignment paper or a blank piece of paper, write down your name, date, lesson topic, title of your story, who the characters are, what the setting is, and the 3 main events or actions that take place. And those are just going to be ideas, not the actual sentences. The second step when you're writing the first draft is to start your story with one of the introduction sentence frames from the elements of a narrative graphic. Make sure you introduce your characters and setting with lots of details. Write the rest of your story until the problem is solved, and that would be the end of your story. You've got the intro, body, and conclusion written down in your first draft. Then in the editing and revising, you're going to use the writing quality checklist to make sure you don't forget anything. Skip the ones you're not sure about. Improve your essay so that it sounds perfect enough to read aloud to an audience, like your siblings, parents, or relatives. Practice reading it out loud to yourself first, and then read it to someone else. This will help you see flaws that you might not have seen on your own. And make sure you let your audience know that if there's anything that doesn't make sense, to let you know so that you can edit or revise it. So those are the questions you might be asking when doing your writing assignment. Now we're going to go on to a blank piece of paper as opposed to the lesson assignment. And I'm going to show you what you would do on a blank piece of paper. If you're using a pencil, that's fine, or a pen. But if you're doing it on a computer, then this is how it would look. Regardless, you're going to have the subject on the top left corner, your name on the top right corner, the lesson topic on the left side underneath the subject, the date underneath your name. Then you're going to skip a line. Make sure you skip this line, and then you're going to write your title. My title is The New York Baker. Every major word must be capitalized in your title, especially the first word. The is not a major word, but it's the first word, so that's going to be capitalized. And then the rest of the words are going to be capitalized. If I change this title and wrote something like The Baker in New York, I'm going to make sure I capitalize the first word, capitalize the major words like Baker and New York. I can see I didn't do that one capital, but the word in, I'm not going to capitalize because it's not a major word. So now here's for the planning. This is what it would look like if I did everything that I talked about from this page. So I would write down what the lesson actually says that I should do. So it says, write a story with 8 to 14 sentences similar to the story of the farmer Jesus talked about from Matthew 13, 3 through 8. Create a problem and an ending that shows the results of a wise person who is able to solve the problem. Plan the names and descriptions of 1 to 2 characters, the location and time of year or day, and the main events in your story. Then I copied Matthew 13, 3 through 8 on my paper. And if you're using a computer, it would be easy to copy and paste it. But if you're not, you could just open your Bible and have it right there in front of you. You want to look at this story and identify some of the parts of it. So you have the farmer, which is your character. And in this story, there's only one character. And he is scattering seeds. So that's the main event. And it tells us some details about where he scattered the seed, and there are many problems that occurred in this particular story that created just one big problem. But then in the end, some of the seed that he scattered was on good soil and it produced a large crop. So in this story, we have the characters, we have the plot. Now, what about the setting? The setting would be path, or the path. Another part of the setting would be the sun came up, so it's probably morning time. And that's it for the setting. So we have the path and we have the sun, which is the time. Oh, and we also have the soil, which is part of where they're at. And you can see the hope in this story is that he was able to find a good place for the seeds that produced a crop, and that's the solution to the problem. So my story ideas, after I identify what I'm supposed to write about, I'm going to write down some story ideas. So I would be thinking to myself, I need to write about a wise person who solves a problem. And that's basically the gist of all of our stories, a wise person who solves a problem. There could be foolish people in our story, but you got to have a wise person that solves the problem. The second idea is I need to decide what the problem is, who the characters are, and what the setting will be. So then I'm thinking the character in the Bible story is a farmer. I can just think of someone as a character who works somewhere like the farmer, or someone who works with plants or animals. I could choose a baker who has to overcome problems making food for other people. I could choose an animal trainer who has to overcome problems training animals. I could choose a builder who has to overcome problems building a house for a nice family. Or I could choose a teacher who has to overcome problems teaching children, because I am a teacher and that's something I'm familiar with. So I gave these as examples just to show you that your character can be anybody. I chose a baker because that has to do with food, and this story had to do with food, so I was just thinking about that. And then I chose animal trainer because a farmer is someone who works with plants or animals, so I was like, well, let's just choose an animal trainer, someone who works with animals. And then a builder, I chose a builder because I thought that would be something that would be relatable. It's close to a farmer because it's someone who works with their hands, but in this case, they're building a house. And then I chose a teacher because I'm a teacher and I'm familiar with that. So you can choose any type of character, something that you're familiar with, something that you know something about, just go with anything. And like I said, I ended up choosing a baker because I've been watching a lot of shows with baking on TV, and you can make your decision like that too. What have you been doing or thinking about, or who have you been visiting that you can write a story about? So if I need to include these other things, point of view, theme, style, intro, body, and conclusion, then I've decided I'm going to use third person because I don't like to use myself. I don't like to say, I went here and I did this and I did that, but I'm going to talk about someone else, my characters, which is going to be my baker. And then the theme is I want to bring hope and emphasize character and how individuals can overcome their problems using wisdom from the Bible. The theme is something that you you can repeat over and over for each story, because this is really important in this particular course. We want our stories to have a biblical worldview. The next one is style. I've decided that I might use some dialogue, but it will mostly be description because I'm better at that, but I might use dialogue. Then for my introduction, I'm going to introduce the setting, characters, and possibly a general idea of my plot. And for my body, I'm going to describe how my story's problem is created and make sure my audience knows what the problem is. And then in my conclusion, I will make sure the problem in my story is solved and include how it makes everyone feel or think. If you want to take this whole section right here and copy what I did, then that would be perfectly fine because it's pretty standard what I'm saying here. I might change one of my stories at some point in this course to first person, or I might use mostly dialogue instead of mostly description, but those are the only two that might vary. So now I have a clearer direction for what to write. Now I'm ready for my writing assignment. And as you can see, it takes a lot of thinking and planning and making sure you know what to do before you actually start writing. So on the writing assignment, I have my name, lesson topic, and date, and my title, The New York Baker. And I put the word shorter here only to show you that this is the short version of my story. So I decided my baker's name is going to be Tim, and he's working with his wife, Wendy, and they have clients. In this case, they have one client, the person who is making an order. The setting is New York City in the winter time. It's cold and a bit snowy, but not too bad where people can't go out. My plot is that Tim and Wendy get an order and they make a plan to execute the order. The client changes their order midway. That's the problem. And then, of course, Tim and Wendy figure out how to solve that problem and help their clients. So I start with once upon a time because that is the easiest way to start a story. Once upon a time, there was a baker named Tim and his wife, Wendy, period. Right off the bat, it's easy for me to write that sentence because I'm just telling who my characters are. I didn't even start with the setting, but that's what I did for this story. They lived in New York City. There's my setting. So I got my characters in the first sentence, my setting in the second sentence, and then my third sentence is what they're doing. They wanted to help a local group of widows who make baby blankets for single mothers. So I just created this particular storyline because I want to show what kind of people Tim and Wendy are. They're very helpful and they want to help widows and they want to help single mothers. So they're very helpful. But I didn't say that they're helpful. I just wrote down that this is what they wanted to do to show that they're helpful. The client wanted to make a special dinner for the widows before it got too cold and snowy. So here's a little bit more about my setting. It's not just New York City, but it's cold and probably in the wintertime at some point. The client wanted 3 types of mini cakes with different flavors and different blanket patterns on them for decoration because he's doing this event for the widows who are making blankets for single mothers. He wanted these mini cakes to have different patterns of blankets on them. My next sentence says, Tim created the designs and Wendy made the cakes, period. That's what Tim and Wendy did. Next, I wrote, Tim prepared all the tools for the decorations and finished 2 of them. They came out so beautiful. So I'm adding interest here where I'm not just saying what he did, but I'm explaining what it looked like. Tim was so happy with his creations until, now this is where my problem comes in, until he realized the designs didn't match the cake flavor he was supposed to do. I'm imagining that the client said, we want certain designs to go with certain flavors, but he realized they didn't match. But he was running out of time. So here's a second part of the problem. Problem is the flavors and designs didn't match and he's running out of time. So, oh my gosh, it's a panic. And I'm just imagining what's going on in this story. And I'm really just making this up as I go. It could literally be anything. whatever comes out of your mind. The next sentence says, he wasn't sure what to do. Oh no, what are we going to do? I could have added some dialogue here, actually, where I said, instead of he wasn't sure what to do, I could say, he told Wendy, comma, and then quotation marks, I'm not sure what to do, or what do you think I should do? Something like that, where you end it with your period or question mark and then end quotation marks. But in this case, I'm just using description. Apparently I didn't use dialogue at all. So that's going to be for another lesson when I go more into that. But then, so he didn't know what to do, and Wendy reminded him to ask God for wisdom, and he did. So this is where we're adding in this hopeful element, this truth element of the fact that God can help them. So then I put, God reminded him of how God provided enough flour for the widow in 1 Kings 17. Now, if you don't know this story, that's okay, but I decided I was going to pick this particular story because I was thinking about where in the Bible does it talk about baking? And this is the story that came to mind. This is where the prophet told the widow to make a cake or some bread or something so that he could eat. And she did, but she didn't have enough flour, so God ended up providing for her. And that's why I just mentioned really briefly what happened in this story. So then my next sentence is, he began to think about what he had in his bakery and decided to add to the design so that it would be a better fit for the cake flavors, and the client loved it. So he got creative and came up with a different solution without having to redo everything. That's how he solved the problem. And I state how the problem was solved in that sentence. My last sentence says, they were able to finish the cakes on time, and the widows group had a great dinner with the cutest desserts ever. So here I conclude with the solution of how it made the widows feel when they went to this special dinner, and they loved the cakes. And that's the thought process I went through when writing this story. So hopefully this was helpful for you. I'm going to now do the same thing, but I'm going to make the story longer. So now we go to the longer version, and you can see that I added a little bit more detail. The shorter version is good. I don't want you to think that you have to make it long, but the short version is good. It's going to be sufficient. If that's the best that you have, great. You've got the main parts to the story. You got a beginning, a middle, an end. You got a problem. You have the theme. You have characters. You have setting and all these things. Then you're a good writer. Just because I have a longer version doesn't mean that the shorter version is not good. The longer version is better than the short version, but you can't expect to get better if you don't start with the shorter version. So you can take your short version and make it longer, or if you know how, you can make your story longer as you're writing it and add as much detail as possible. So in this longer version, I have a lot more detail. Let's read. Once upon a time, there was a passionate baker named Tim, a tall, bearded man, and a tall, red-haired wife, Wendy, who lived in New York City. So here you can see I added the detail of what kind of person Tim was and what he looked like. And I also added what Wendy looked like. And I included where they lived in this particular sentence. They were born and raised there and loved to bake since they were young. So this tells me a little bit about them, what kind of people they are, what their qualities are. Both of them wanted to help a local group of widows who make baby blankets for single mothers. So this tells you a little bit more about how helpful they are. So another quality. The leader of the group wanted to make a special dinner for them, and he told the baker exactly what he wanted for the dessert. So this is where I start my plot. He wanted 3 types of mini cakes with different flavors and different blanket patterns on them for decoration. So Tim and Wendy were excited to help. So here, this sentence tells what they were feeling at the time. Tim created the designs and Wendy got to work on the cake recipes. Wendy put the chocolate chip cake in the oven and it came out perfect. Then she put the vanilla bean cake in the oven and it came out perfectly. Lastly, she put the red velvet cake in the oven, and soon all of them were ready for decorations. So in this section here, I added what kinds of cakes they were actually making. That's an added detail that I didn't have in the shorter version. So now we know that there's a chocolate chip cake, a vanilla bean cake, and a red velvet cake. Let's read on. Tim prepared all the tools for the decorations and finished 2 of them. They came out so beautiful. Each one had a different design and a beautiful color pattern. So I described what type of design. So I added this adjective different, and I described with a little more detail the pattern, a beautiful color pattern. And you can easily do this with your sentences. Go back and add some adjectives to some of your nouns. Tim was so happy with his creations until he realized the designs didn't match the cake flavor he was supposed to do, but he was running out of time. That is essentially the same sentence as the short version. He wasn't sure he could change it. He wasn't sure he should tell his client. So this tells me a little bit more about what he was thinking. He started to worry, but Wendy reminded him to ask God for wisdom. So there's the problem. Not only do we have the problem of having mismatched designs and flavors, but we also have the problem of him worrying and how Wendy helps him. The next sentence, she wanted him to focus on all the possible solutions and figure out which one was the best. So he did. So this is a sentence to tell me exactly how Wendy helped him. God reminded him of how God provided enough flour for the widow in 1 Kings 17. He began to think about what he had in his bakery and decided to add to the design so that it would be a better fit for the cake flavors, and the client agreed. They were able to finish the cakes on time, and the widow's group had a great dinner with the cutest desserts ever. So that's the same. So you can see here what I did to add some detail to this whole thing. I added a lot more information about the characters, the setting, plot, and the characters' thoughts and feelings. So now I'm done writing my story, and now I'm going to go to the writing checklist, and I'm going to see the beginning of my narrative starts with one of the introduction sentence frames. Once upon a time, yes. There are 2 or more characters in my essay. Yes, that's easy. There is at least one sentence that describes appearance, qualities, and role of each of the characters in my narrative. I put no because I'm evaluating my short version, which I forgot to mention. So this is evaluating my short version to also show you that this is what inspired my longer version. There is at least 2 sentences in the introduction that describe the location, time of the setting in my essay. No, I have only 1. My plot has a clear event sequence with beginning, middle, and end that develops my story and tells what each part is about. I put paragraph here because once we get into multi-paragraphs, we'll need to talk about that. So yes, my plot is clear. I have a good beginning, middle, and end. The beginning plot paragraph sparks interest in my reader by introducing the character setting and how the story uses several descriptive words in each paragraph. That one I'm not sure of, so I'm just going to put the check mark on the outside or not check it at all. The middle plot paragraph increases interest in my reader by describing a problem that causes the reader to ask, how are they going to solve this, and how does this influence the characters? I'm not really sure about that, so I put that on the side. The ending plot paragraph or part brings the problem to an unexpected conclusion with a solution that shows my reader how the characters responded. Yes, I did do that. All the sentences in my essay reflect a point of view that tells who the speaker is and what they know and believe about the story. That one I'm not sure yet, so I'm going to leave it for later. All the sentences in my essay point to a specific theme that tells what the message is, why it's true, and how it's important. Yes, definitely put in there the theme about the character solving the problem. I boosted the style of my narrative by adding transition words, dialogue, or figurative language. No, I did not do that, so actually, I'm going to put this on no. Or if you don't understand it yet, which is perfectly fine, because I didn't talk about it yet, so I'm going to leave it out here because if I were you, the student, I wouldn't know what that means yet. All of the words in my essay follow common spelling and grammar rules. I put no, but I'm going to change it to yes, because there are no mistakes in spelling or grammar. If there are mistakes in spelling or grammar, you can fix them and then mark yes. But if you don't know that you have those mistakes, you can still put yes, and the teacher hopefully will help you with that. All my sentences begin with a capital letter, end with a period, and make sense when I read them out loud. I put that on the side because I'm not sure about that. It's possible that you might not be sure about that. So then I would add up my score, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have 6 yeses and 2 nos, and the goal would be to have 13 yeses and 0 nos by the end of this course, or close to it. So then if I were the student, I would say, when I read it out loud to myself, I realized a few sentences didn't make sense, so I fixed them. It sounded good when I read it aloud to others. They loved it. So this would be a good time to really think about whether it made sense and whether you read it out loud, because that's really the best way to figure out if you're a good writer, is if you feel confident about reading it out loud to others and there's no other mistakes that you need to fix. So then if I were to listen to your essay, well, my essay in this case, and I was the teacher, I would say your introduction was great. Go ahead and put the X on that one, which I did. And then I ask a question, do you want another explanation of point of view? Because that's something that you don't understand yet. So as a teacher, I would want to explain that to you. And that's it for the lesson 2 bonus, what you should be thinking about when doing your writing assignment. Hopefully this was helpful and you're able to come up with your own creative story. Thanks for watching.